Hey, what's up, y'all? This is Michael Franti here, and welcome to this week's episode of the Stay Human podcast. I have a super amazing person who I admire a ton, whose music I love. I love his band, and I love what he does as the co-executive director of REVERB. And for those of you who don't know, Adam Gardner is his name. He's rallied his fellow musicians and their millions of fans to take action towards a better future for people and the planet at concerts and beyond. And REVERB partners with major musicians like Billie Eilish, Dave Matthews Band, Jack Johnson, Harry Styles, Fleetwood Mac, Dead and Company, John Mayer, Pink, Maroon 5. I mean, man, if James Brown was alive, I bet he'd be working with James Brown. And empowering fans to take action for people and the planet. Since 2004, REVERB's programs and touring staff have been folded into 300 plus major tours, festivals, and venues, eliminating the use of over 3 million single-use plastic water bottles, keeping over 880,000 metric tons of CO2 from the air, supporting the creation of over 100 climate change fighting projects around the world and over 4,200 environmental groups across the country. So, man, that's a lot of stuff you've been doing, bro.
Busy.
You've been keeping busy. So, welcome to the show. This is the great Adam Gardner from Guster. And Adam, man, I want to get into all this stuff because it's near and dear to my heart. And I just admire you, man. You're like I got to say, you're one of the coolest people on the planet and the coolest people in music. And before we do that, on this show, I always like to find out where people are from. So just tell me a little bit about yourself. Like, where did you grow up and what was your family like?
Yeah, I grew up in New Jersey, which is kind of an unlikely, people look at environmentalism and go, a Jersey boy doing this stuff? That's kind of weird. I live in Maine now, and I love that. But it's interesting enough, like a lot of people who aren't familiar with the state, there are beautiful parts of the state.
Oh, yeah.
I was lucky enough to grow up in a very wooded area. In fact, my immediate surroundings here in Maine aren't really that different than what I grew up with as a kid. And I have kids of my own now. And I remember growing up, running around in the woods. I actually I grew up in a very small town. I went to a K through 8 elementary school that had a class size of 32 kids for the whole grade. So it was pretty small. There were more horse trails than roads. We didn't have a proper traffic light when I was growing up. There was just a blinker at kind of the main thing. It almost harkened to a different time. When I look back at it, of course, now it's been overdeveloped, unfortunately, but, I think,
what was the name of your town?
It's called New Vernon, New Jersey.
Okay. Yeah.
So it was weird. It was like this little kind of oasis. Of course, now I know a little bit more about the context of it and why it was protected as a wooded area. But the history of it was a farm area. The Garden State isn't a misnomer everywhere. When people think of Jersey, they think of the Turnpike or the Garden State Parkway. But there's actually a lot of beautiful wooded and farmland in northern central Jersey, and that's where I came from.
Nice. And what did your parents do?
My dad was a doctor, and my mom was a public health nurse. So very medical family. And I have 2 older sisters. I was kind of a surprise, you might say. I have two older sisters that are 13 months apart, so they're very close in age. And then I came 5 years later. Okay. So yeah, I was like, surprise, here I am. So they were. I think I think there's actually been studies that say people who have older sisters end up being happier. Wow. And because I think the older siblings being female, I remember kind of, especially because I was so far in age from them, I remember as a little boy calling my mom, then I had my little mom, and then my littlest mom. So I felt very nurtured. I felt a lot of female energy in the home. My dad was a very busy doctor. He was around, but he was working a lot. So I remember lots of times he would come home, join us for dinner. Maybe we'd play a little bit of, whatever games we could play together. And then he'd go back out to the hospital. He was a neurosurgeon. So he was constantly working. He worked at 3 different hospitals. And, if you have to see my dad, you're not in good shape. So he was out there fighting his own fight to keep people alive.
Wow. And so when you were a kid, what's the earliest thing that you remember growing up there in New Vernon? In the woods.
For me, it really is like there's a little creek behind our house, and I remember kind of just digging around in there. It was really teeny. Maybe if it had just rained, maybe it was 2.5 feet deep.
Yeah.
So it was safe, and therefore I had total freedom to just run around the woods. And we had little crayfish in there, and even the beds of the river had it was clay that I remember like molding into little like figurines and stuff. And so right from an early age, I was just in the woods. Everything was micro. I wanted to look at all the little bugs and the stuff on the ground. And so I have very fond memories of that and just feeling free. And there were some other neighborhood kids, and we'd go exploring is what we'd call it. We'd follow the river to the lake, and we'd follow the river the other way to where it sprung out of the earth. And so, yeah, I've never really thought about it that way, but I guess now that we're here and I'm talking to you about it, and we're kind of, you just laid out all that environmental stuff. I was like, maybe that is how that started to click in right away.
Well, did your parents have any kind of environmental consciousness? Was that part of your upbringing, or?
Not aggressively. I mean, recycling was always a thing, and I did the Cub Scouts, and I remember, part of our work was to help with the recycling. I think back then, like, we were crushing glass and stuff, which is of course ridiculous. You think about a bunch of young kids like smashing bottles and stuff with sledgehammers and stuff. I was like, I don't think we had safety goggles on. It was a different age. It was a different time. As a parent,
reminds me of
look back and go,
Reminds me of when I was a bar back. I used to get off on that at the end of work. I'd get all my frustrations out by dumping huge bins of glass into other bins of glass. So, and your mom, what was she like in your life?
She was very present. I think she came from that generation where love was expressed by doing, and she was always there. I can't think of one sporting event or musical concert or anything that I did that she was not there, and just always had my back. So that, when I think of my mom, especially when I was a boy, I'm fortunate enough that they're both 80 and they're both alive, and healthy and doing well, which is amazing. So I feel very fortunate there. When I think about who they were to me when I, was growing up, she was just a badass, always there, worked her butt off, but also made sure that her family was number one priority. And she would always work her schedule. So she was there. And, and I think, her mother, not to get too deep into this, but her mother wasn't. Her mother had mental illness. And I think she fought against, I think she wanted to give us what she didn't have. And I think every good parent wants that for their kids. And she did it.
Yeah. So as a kid growing up, was music a part of your life and in your household?
Yeah. And that's where my father came in. He was a musical guy. He's a brilliant neurosurgeon, Harvard educated guy. Like, he's like, no joke. And so that was intimidating because I'm no dummy, but I'm definitely not. I wasn't like, academics were not like top priority for me. I kind of did as well as I could to not get in trouble by anybody, just kind of duck and get by and do the good work. But, I didn't get passionate about academics until college, until I really found subjects that really got me excited. And
did you ever butt heads with your dad because of that?
No, actually, it's funny. No, he was very cool. It's just it just felt like a lot to live up to, given all that he has accomplished and just who he is. At the same time, he brought music. He was a pianist, and so music was always in the house. He would play piano. My sister sang and played piano as well, flute, and so music was always there. And I guess for me, it was one of those things where I was like forced to take piano lessons. I didn't really want to, but boy, am I glad I did, because that gave me the foundation to it. And then, kind of the usual school thing, like, oh, you have to choose an instrument for marching band. And so what's it going to be? So I played trumpet, and so learned how to sight read a little bit more that way. And then that was kind of the end of my formal education. I picked up a guitar. Then I think a buddy and I were like, wouldn't it be cool if we had electric guitars? And we didn't know anything about how to play them, but we found some, like there's a, music store nearby that was renting, little Gorilla 10-watt amps and whatever, cheapo guitars for, it was like, whatever it was, it's like $20 a month. We're like, let's just rent them and we'll figure it out later. And that's what we did. And, we went down to the basement and made a bunch of noise and loved it.
Yeah.
So I think it was really from that point where I got very excited. It wasn't music became something I wanted to do as something I had to versus something I had to do.
And how old were you at that point when you started playing electric guitar?
That was like 7th or 8th grade. So,
okay.
Yeah.
So you're still like forming you're going through puberty and all that stuff. Tell me about that. What was that part of your life? Like, what were the challenges for you, as that age of a kid, and you're going up in a small community, and your family's really educated, and you're like down in the basement being a rock star. And what was it like in the community with other people, and what were the hardest parts of being that age?
I think for me the hardest part was, honestly, I was very fortunate. Like I didn't, I've got a daughter who's 12, so she's right in the thick of all of that right now. Like God. all that's happening, all the changes are going on. She's doing great. She's doing great. But I'm just aware of like, oh right, like I actually, honestly, I feel very lucky. I went through puberty very young, and not in a scary way because I came from a medical family. It wasn't like what's going on in my body. Like I understood and. I don't really remember getting the talk, but I knew anyway. And so it must have happened. It just wasn't traumatic enough for me to remember it happening. So I feel very lucky that way. And I was, sports were a big part of what I was doing. So, and because I shot up before everybody, I was faster and stronger and bigger than everyone. So I felt very comfortable in my own skin. It actually led to a lot of really positive experiences and probably allowed me to feel confident enough to be like, yeah, I'm going to be a musician and try to be, do it for a living. Like that takes a certain amount of a level of belief in yourself that I don't know if I would have had if I didn't actually just go through all those changes at that time in a smooth and early fashion. Now, of course, I became a very lazy athlete because I didn't learn any skills because I was bigger and faster than everybody at the time. But then once everybody caught up, I was very average at sports. But it was enough to. By then, it was too late. I'd already thought well of myself in a good way. I wasn't delusional, but I felt confident.
Yeah. And what was it about music though that drew you in? What was the thing? I mean, it's one thing I know that feeling of like you get down in your space or your garage or your rehearsal room and you turn the amps up way too loud and there's certainly like there's a power to it. There's a feeling and vibration and like I strike the chord and round this crank comes out of it and then at some point you go, well, what am I going to do with this? Like, what is it? How do I shape this into something that's worthy of other people hearing it or is worthy of my emotions being put into it and my thoughts, my feelings, my ideas about myself and about the world. So how did that come to be?
Yeah. So like very quickly, I think it's maybe it's not. I think it's a fairly standard garage band story where it's like, well, the second I could play 3 chords, I learned a bunch of other songs because that, 3 chords gets you a lot of the rock catalog. Yeah. All of us opens up to you. And, I had another buddy that I was, playing sports with and was learning, like did the similar thing that I did with the guitar, but with the drum set. It's like, I'll bring the drums over. And we just started jamming like literally like the second I learned that 3rd chord, we were trying to play Beatles songs and whatever we could figure out. I did have a guitar teacher that I only took for only a couple of years, but the biggest takeaway from that was like using your ear and learning like when you hear the song, how to figure out to translate that to an instrument and learn how to play that song that you love and are listening to. So for me, again, with my older sisters, I remember before even picking up an instrument, just listening to their records in the basement, and some of the early records that turned me on to music. And it was really through a sonic place. Like I was like, God, that sounds so cool was that first Cars record. And I was like, man, the way those guitars sound, how do they, I still really don't know how they got those tones.
No, and the synthesizers too, and just the drums, how it all was so metronomic, you know, it was so like, it sounded like it's done with drum machines, but it wasn't, you know, it was drums.
Yeah. And yet still had emotion and like a cool swagger and like all this stuff that was just like, I don't know why I like this, but I do. And,
love those records.
But it really was like an oral experience. Like just listening and hearing it made me excited. And so it was a combination of that initial, like, wow, I like music, to then, I can play 3 songs and kind of, the drum set together with my buddy. And then, you know, we brought another friend over who could play piano, and he had a keyboard, and we plugged in and just started very quickly figuring stuff out. And I just remember like sitting in like social studies class, like working out signal chain and stuff, being like, how are we going to get a PA to put out the blah, blah, blah. And like, we're going to go play the battle of the bands. And like, we need to figure out like, you know, all the gear stuff. I was like doing stage plots and stuff in my notebooks during school. So I just got very into all of it, from the logistics of it to the playing to the learning. Kind of got an education because thank God that the teacher taught me like how to listen with my ear and translate that to my fingers. I just got an education together with my 2 other bandmates. We played in a band for 5 years together, from like 8th grade through, actually it was longer than that. So 8th grade through senior year of high school. And just went through like the classic rock catalog and played all those songs and really studied them and got inside every little solo and every little chord change. And
wow. Did you guys write any of your own tunes, or was it just covers?
We just were starting to write a couple of our own tunes. I mean, this is where growing up in New Jersey played a role. Like it was just, there weren't a lot of avenues for original music in my immediate area, you know. Without, we weren't a place where I was, the driving age there was 17. So it wasn't like we were able to go, all right, let's go into the city and make something happen. It was like, we were just in our immediate area. So it was really just about, you know, battle of the bands and stuff like that, and learning covers. So we wrote a couple songs, you know, they were, as you would imagine, if the first songs are, but no, the real songwriting thing didn't happen until college.
So tell me about that. Where did you go to school?
I went to Tufts University outside of Boston.
Sure.
And that's where I met Ryan and Brian from Guster. Like literally there's orientation, and then a week or two before the actual orientation where everybody goes to show up at school is wilderness orientation. And I signed up for that, and I met Ryan and Brian in the woods in New Hampshire while we were just doing some hiking and camping before school started. And met them, kind of became friends with them. Our dorms were kind of near each other. We were friends first, and then it was one of those like, oh, you play guitar and sing? Yeah, I played in a band in high school too. Oh, maybe we should jam. But we didn't. We came from different musical backgrounds and didn't know any songs in common. So we started writing them, and that was kind of how that started, like right away, freshman year in college.
Wow. And so at that time, what were you guys writing about, or were you all writing the lyrics together, or was it kind of, I got an idea for a song or I wrote the whole song and bring it to the band, or how was it working?
I'm trying to remember exactly how it went down, but I think it was as it mostly is now, where we sit around and write collaboratively. Lyrics in the beginning were insufferable. If I look back now, and a lot of those lyrics are on our first record. You know, that first album we made in college. We were, juniors when that record was released, and we just put it out on vinyl like last week.
Wow.
But I think we were going through, it was very collegiate as far as the themes, the lyrical themes. And I was, one of the songs that I'm thinking of, which is a ridiculous title, is called Happy Frappy. And it was very, I was taking a philosophy class, and I was thinking about sociology and psychology, I was a psych major. And so it was a lot of those, the messages were nice. The execution was, we were beginners,
Yeah.
And it's always interesting having something like that. It's, it's almost like looking at pictures of yourself when you were going through puberty. Sometimes listening to those early records, you're like, that was a snapshot in time. We're not there now, and trying not to, you can hear that I'm like trying to make excuses and caveats about that music, but it was for where we were and for a bunch of kids that got together, tried to make some music together for the first time. I'm
Yeah.
actually proud of that. So I need to remember to be proud.
It's kind of like a tattoo, that you've had, like my first tattoo, my buddy did it, but it's there, and it's me, and it's it's not the best tattoo artistically, but it does mark a time period. And how did the name Guster come to be?
Well, we were Gus first. And I have no, I mean, it was one of those, again, we never thought at first we were just buddies playing music together, right? And we just needed to come up with a name just to put on a flyer that we could hang on the cork boards around college campuses. So, we're playing at the coffee house, whatever it was. So, I don't know, there were 3 members, 3 letters, it was Gus.
Okay.
And then, so when we sold a bunch of records, we played in Harvard Square, we busked on the streets, which was actually really interesting education in and of itself. Like, how do you capture people's attention when they're walking by? They're not there to see you. They're not there to even see music. They're shopping in Harvard Square or whatever they're doing. How do you draw them in and keep them there and hold their attention? And that was a really interesting.
How do you entertain? Yeah.
Yeah. It was an interesting kind of, again, education through doing. But through that, weirdly, we'd play like Head of the Charles, where all these colleges and all these college kids from all over would come in. And so we started becoming this kind of underground. Again, this is pre-internet, making a CD was like, oh my God, you can make a CD. Of course, now anyone can make anything in their bedroom at any time.
Yeah.
At that time, it was like we went to a real studio. We had to spend real money. I remember the producer telling us what it was going to cost, and we were like, "Oh my God, this is never going to happen,"
Yeah.
But then we just played enough in Harvard Square and put out our, we had a cassette tape. We sold those for $5 out of our guitar, like on the streets, and we sold a bunch of them. And same thing with our CD. Like before we graduated, I think we sold like 50,000 albums out of our backpacks, basically. And just through like playing colleges and playing in Harvard Square and playing in our own school. And then we kind of created this rep program where, do you remember the Aware compilations?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were part of that. I don't know if you were part of that or not, but you certainly were like in that same sphere.
Yeah.
And there's a band called Jacko Pierce. I don't know if you remember them.
No.
They're an acoustic duo from Dallas. And they were very smart about, before they even came to Boston, they were friends with Ryan. Ryan grew up in Texas. And they were really smart. Like, oh, you like my band and your friends are into our music? Here's 10 CDs. Just sell them. And when you do, give us the money. And they're like, well, that's interesting. And we started doing this, what we called a rep program, where fans, if they liked us and they, wrote to us, email existed then at least. We're like, hey, if you want to sell 10 CDs, we'll just mail them to you. We like packed them up in like cereal boxes and drew some little, drawings and said thanks. And we actually like made them little rep badges where we'd give them rep names and like some weird drawing and off they went. It was it was an honor system and mostly worked. But what really worked is that it was a distribution system.
Yeah.
At a time
music got out there. People heard it. Yeah.
Yeah. And through that, we distributed a bunch of CDs and had a nice core fan base of these reps that were like passionate about what we were doing. So we did that for a long time and had thousands of reps.
At what point did this idea, like, okay, we're getting going, we're touring, we're selling some records, we're getting building an audience, and at what point did you start to feel like, maybe there's something more to this? Maybe there's a message that I can be delivering, or the band can be delivering, or there's partnerships we could create with other bands. Like, how did that idea that eventually led to starting REVERB enter into it all?
I think it was, I think maybe there was like one too many emails asking about like what product I put in my hair or what jeans I was wearing or something like that. And I was like, there's got to be a more elevated dialogue here. This isn't satisfying at all. And it's awesome that people are interested in wanting to connect. So is there a way that we can connect on a level that is more meaningful? And I think at the same time, so at Tufts, I met Ryan and Brian freshman year, and then my sophomore year, I met my now wife, Lauren, who's the co-executive director of Reverb and co-founder of it. Really, she founded Reverb. I'm the co-founder. She's the pilot. I'm the co-pilot. She came from the environmental world. She worked for Rainforest Action Network, where she met you at a Ruckus event years ago, and she was in San Francisco at the end of the 90s. And so for her, she was always the environmentalist, and I was always the musician. And then when we started dating and living together and falling in love, and we moved in and together, and that's when I think seeing how she lived and wanting to be in her good graces and to wanting her to love me back. I was like, I should probably, and also just made a lot. Honestly, it also just made a lot of sense. Like, that's common sense. Yeah, we shouldn't be just shitting where we eat. And it doesn't make sense to pollute our immediate surroundings and poison our air, soil, and food systems and water. And so it just made sense to me. And then I'd, go back out on tour and go, oh my God, this all flies in the face of everything I'm doing at home. All the plastic waste on the ground, all the, the generator and the bus never stopping, just everything being so disposable in nature when it comes to live music, and all the, thousands of people driving from wherever to get to the show every night. It just was like, once you started looking through that lens, it just became literally eye-opening, right? And I was just like, oh my God. And at the time we were touring with, we were opening for bands like Maroon 5 and Dave Matthews Band, and a lot of the bands you mentioned at the beginning of the show that now work with Reverb. We were all feeling similarly, like, God, this is a shame. This doesn't represent who we are. Yet it is, unfortunately, a huge part of what we do. How do we, and it kind of started with that, like, damn, this sucks. And then I think I just complained to Lauren one too many times after coming home from a tour, being like, God, it's just a shit show out there.
Yeah. And
she was like, well, stop shrugging your shoulders at each other. You're talking to other artists that feel the same. You have the ability to do something about it. Come together. And at the same time, when she was working at Rainforest Action Network, meeting folks like you and Bonnie Raitt and Dave Matthews, seeing how when musicians get behind causes, it seriously amplifies the public's interest and engagement in those causes. Yeah. So I think, and she was always a pop kid. Like her interest was bringing environmentalism to the mainstream, because I think, back in the 90s and early 2000s, green was just a color. Sustainability wasn't really even a common word. Environmentalism was for a certain
hippies
group of, it was for like hippie crunchy people. That's it. And it was not at all mainstream. And so she was interested in bringing it mainstream. I was interested in talking to mainstream artists in cleaning up our own act. And she was like, cool, let's not only, help transform music and making it more sustainable, but let's use music as this platform to engage all your fans and all the artist fans to take action and get into this. Like, music is such a huge cultural driver. How do we shift culture with music and musicians that care to save our own asses effectively? It's
describe how Reverb works, like in a practical sense. Because we've had Reverb out on our tours, but just for some people who never knew about Reverb, describe how, like, a band approaches you or you approach a band and say, hey, you guys want to be involved in this? And then what does Reverb do in terms of the tour and
touring is probably the easiest way to think about it. We do more than tours too, but certainly started there, and it is still a huge core of what we are and do. So a lot of it is legit. A lot of it is logistics, right? There's this huge divide between what an artist wants to have happen and what actually happens. And so a lot of what we are and do is just helping cross that chasm between intentions and actions. And so, we will fold a member of our team into the touring crew, just like a guitar tech or sound guy, to handle a lot of the stuff on the ground that everyone's, plates are too full to handle out on the road already. All the crew folks out there on the tour are very focused on pulling off the show smoothly. And that's right. But therefore we realized, like, the easiest thing to do is just insert one of our staff into the team to like be dedicated to making the tours more sustainable. And then we have the office here in Portland, Maine, that handles all the logistics and set up ahead of time. So we have we call it kind of like mission control and Major Tom. And although actually most of our on-site coordinators are female, so we got to come up with a better name than Tom. So, the idea is whether that's sourcing food for caterers within X miles from local and organic family farmers, biodiesel for the buses and trucks. We'll come in and actually coordinate wet hosings at the venues to fill up. Setting up programs. So there's kind of two things, right? Like looking at the tour itself and the concerts, and how do we reduce waste and carbon footprints and all the negative impacts that the events themselves hold. And then there's the other side and then how do we engage fans at the concerts? We set up an eco village and bring in local and national nonprofit groups. We have volunteers across the country now, thousands of them, that we can bring in and coordinate. So somebody at the REVERB office, for example, will, for every show on a tour, be like, cool, we need 15 volunteers every night at each market. Let's rally them, get them signed up, make sure they're vetted and know what they're doing. So it's a long list of things that we do to make the tour more sustainable, looking at food, looking at plastic waste. So we have our own water stations that we'll set up, providing free filtered water stations from municipal sources at the venue. We have a partnership with Nalgene called Rock and Refill that you talked about, where we eliminated so far over 3 million single-use water bottles at the concerts. Never mind the fact that they take home a reusable water bottle and hopefully are using that moving forward. That's certainly the idea. And from what we can qualitatively understand, that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
So it's a long list, and there's no silver bullet. It's kind of this wedge theory of like, you got to just do every little thing that you can, but it's not all or nothing either, right? Like, I think it's a really important philosophical approach for us, whether you're an artist or an industry leader or a fan. Like, we're not asking you to do everything. We just asking you to start doing things, because a few people doing everything is not going to add up to everybody doing a few things. Mm-hmm. And that's the key.
You mentioned, how many kids do you have?
2.
Okay. So as a parent, I look at this next generation of kids, and environmentalism is in their blood. They are so concerned about their lives, their planet. They're concerned about social consciousness in terms of race, sexuality, gender, so many things that previous generations have really struggled with. They are loud and proud about vocalizing. And at the same time, they are subject to the pressures of social media and of comparing themselves to other kids. How, as a parent, do you approach the idea of activism for your kid within this greater, bubble of, man, if I post this thing about, Greta Thunberg, now I've got like 100, anti, eco people in my feed, and trying to beat up a 12-year-old, So how, I don't even know if you're there that yet with your kids, but talk to me about it. What do you think you're going to do? How are you going to?
That's it. Yeah, we're not. So we're on the precipice of all of that with our kids. They don't have social media accounts right now. Yeah. And obviously during the pandemic, we're struggling a lot with screen time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think as far as their activism in and of itself, they obviously know what their parents are doing on a daily level, especially now that we're all all working together. Like, our office is at home, and so is their school. We're all in the same place doing our stuff. And so they really know what we're up to even more than ever. It's like a permanent, like, bring your kids to work day.
Yeah.
So they see that and they know that, and they're thoughtful of it. They're obviously very different. They're very different kids. So I have a 12-year-old daughter and a 10-year-old son, and they're amazing. And they're so, what is amazing to me is how different they are. It's like, you grew up in the same house, grew up in the same context, like this nature versus nurture thing. It's like, wow, nature is playing a serious role here. It's not all just nurture, because they've had very similar upbringings.
Yeah.
There's different people. And so my son thinks in big terms. And you know, we were lying in bed. He's 10. We were lying in bed and he was asking me about the Cold War.
Wow.
Like, it was like heavy. It's like, how do I do this for a 10-year-old? How do I explain? Like, he's like, why would we be pointing missiles at each other like that? Like when there's a clearly no-win situation there. And I was like, yeah, you get it.
Yeah.
And I think the hardest part for him is, you know, how to keep him positive about humanity and humans. Because he sees like, this doesn't make any sense. Why are we killing ourselves? Why, like, through war, through environmental destruction? Like, why would we do that? We should be smarter than that. And it's hard to disagree with that.
Yeah.
And I don't. I say, I know. And that's why, Mommy and I are doing what we're doing in the environmental front to, like, you know, there are, you know, humans are beautiful and wonderful and flawed. And we're complex. And that's hard to talk to a 10-year-old about. It's hard to even reconcile it in my 47-year-old self. Like, how does this work? You know, why is this working this way? So yeah, it's interesting. You know, we haven't come across the social media side of that where the haters start coming when you're, you know, when you want to put yourself out there. And it's, you know, honestly, we talk to artists about that too. I mean, I'm sure you know, as an outspoken musician on social and environmental issues, you get it all the time, right? The whole like, hey, shut up and sing.
Yeah. Which
I think is like the worst comment, because it's like, what am I, just a clown to you? Like, I'm a human. And you know, Katie Tunstall said something wonderful, like wonderful about that comment. And she says, I just tell them, if you want, you're on the wrong platform. This is, you know, if I'm on Twitter, you're not hearing my music here, go to Spotify. You're on the wrong platform. If you just want me for my music, go to my music. That's not what this is. Yeah. Which I thought was an interesting retort.
That's a great take. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you obviously can't, I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what your thoughts on this too, but you know, you have to just kind of shut out that noise.
You know, it's really hard. I have 3 sons and they're all kind of different eras almost, because one's 33, one's 22, and one's 2. Wow. And so the 33-year-old grew up in a time of basically email, and there started to be some, you know, chat groups or whatever. And then my second son, he grew up just as like, you know, the social media, you know, Instagram, and I can't even remember all the ones that came and gone. And now my young one, he's growing up with, you know, me and my wife, Sarah, we pick up our phone in the morning and it's like, he sees it and he's like, I want that too.
Right.
You know, and it's really, really hard. Sarah and I have talked about it a lot, about how it is. I mean, it's like being a smoker and then telling your kids not to smoke, you know, because our scrolling behavior is as addictive to us as it is to now this 2-year-old kid who has no frame of reference or self-control in terms of that kind of stuff. And we see how it wears on his psyche, just his desire to have screen time at age 2, you know, and we try to really, really limit it. But, you know, we watch movies together. We watch Daniel Tiger together. You know, it's like, we you know, it's almost unavoidable when he sees us doing it, right. You know? Yeah. And so, man, it's a crazy time to be a human being. And, you know, the last question that I have for you is, you know, I ask everybody at the end of the show, what does it mean to you to be human? And then how do you stay human in this world that is, it feels to me at least like it's trying to suck the humanity out of us so much of the time. And then at other times I'm like, oh my God, wow, how beautiful is that people really do care, or that people really do fumble, and people really do make mistakes, and people really are these organic beings that are part of nature. You know, how do you define being human for yourself, and how do you stay human? How do you hold on to it?
Wow. And I would love to hear, I wish this was, I wish I could now like do the second hour and ask you all the questions I want to ask you. I want to hear your answer to that question too.
I'll be on the REVERB podcast, man.
That's it. We don't have one, but I'll create one just so we can hang out more and talk. I want to learn more about you. Yeah. I mean, that's funny because that was a question I was going to ask you anyway. Like I was like, all right, I knew that, stay human is a big thing.
Yeah.
Throughout your music, that's a big message from you. So I do want to hear your thoughts on this. I mean, for me, I think about groups of people, and maybe this is just like my whole like psychological versus sociological. Mm-hmm. And the thing that always helps me return to that struggle that I was talking about with my son, I have for myself as well, and I'm probably modeling it, is how do I, at times, especially these days, right? Like, how do you feel good about humanity? And the times that I feel best about humanity is when I think about individual humans, when I think about my neighbors, and I think about my kids' teachers, when I think about, various leaders in the community that are truly like people. Generally, it's very easy to go, oh, this whole, like there's this tribalism thing that is kind of cooked into our evolution, unfortunately, because it no longer serves us. In fact, it's completely deleterious. But the is that the right word? It's completely bad for us. Deleterious. And so when I break it back down to like bringing my world and thinking about people within like a smaller situation, not even my bubble, but other bubbles, it changes everything. And that's something that, especially here in Maine, you don't have to drive far to get out of your bubble here in Portland, Maine. And Lauren and I talk about this all the time. We're like, we should like go live in that house and like, we should work at that paper mill for like 4 months and just like jump into that world and understand it. And we talk about like, that should be a reality show or something, but the idea of like, because when you do put yourself in those smaller situations, you go, yeah, these are good people. Like people generally are good to each other. People are generally trying to do the right thing. Family matters. And no matter what your big political thoughts are, or how you think the world should be, it's I think helpful to remember that generally it's coming from a good place. Ultimately, like you may have to crack it down to the core to go, right. Where people are concerned about their safety, about their families, about their communities. And so I think for me, that's what staying human is on that level as far as to each other. But then I also do think about our place in nature and not to forget that we're animals and that we are of nature and not separate from nature. And so then for me, staying human is getting back into those woods, just to bring this full circle, like when I was a little boy in New Jersey, like, and get into that micro level of stuff on the ground and the veins and the leaves and the different, textures of tree bark or whatever it is that just grounds you back into, right. This house is not my natural habitat. And for me, that's, I'm here in Maine and we live 10 minutes away from a local surf spot. And I didn't surf before coming to Maine. I started to learn surf when I was 40, which is great. And especially during the pandemic, it's been huge. And, sometimes I'll just, cause it's cold. I surf all winter too. So I have this huge 6.5 millimeter wetsuit, but it's super buoyant. And I'll just sometimes just roll off my board, especially on a mellow day, and just float and just be in it and of it and try to like picture myself as part of the abyss and just really let into it, physically and on an emotional and spiritual level, like fully succumb to it. And that always really helps me and reminds me to just like, we are of all of this around us. We're not separate from it.
Yeah. Man, that's what I love about you, bro. You inspire me in your philosophy, your music, what you do with REVERB, with Lauren. And it's great to learn more about your life. And how can folks who either want to plug into REVERB or just want to hear Guster's music or see Guster somewhere alive, how can they get in touch or follow you guys?
My phone number is that. I mean, for Guster music stuff, go to guster.com. We are doing as much as we can during this pandemic. We are looking at, we haven't done an official live stream yet. And I think Ryan and I have done a little individual stuff. I know Luke's been doing a bunch of recording. We have been meeting up. We all live in different states, so that's tricky. But there's new music coming. There's concerts coming too. Hopefully, this summer there'll be some little blips and blops of wherever it can happen. And then we'll do some real touring next year. So guster.com for that and on the socials. And then for Reverb, it's reverb.org. And yeah, please plug in. There's all sorts of stuff. While we are very tour oriented, we're also doing a lot of work outside of touring, especially these days. It's been actually a really good time for us to be looking at our work outside of concerts. We have this climate campaign that we're really excited about called the Music Climate Revolution. It's all about transforming our industry, but also then, the typical Reverb way, like using the cultural power of music to change governments, corporate entities, the general public sentiment towards the work we need to do to really turn this around. We have 2030 is a big year that everyone's pointing to that we need to make drastic changes on. So please join the Music Climate Revolution. We're launching that this spring. In an official way. We've been doing it unofficially for a couple of years, and so far the pilot phase of that has been very successful and very hopeful. So that's been exciting.
Nice. Well, folks, we've been talking with Adam Gardner from Guster and the co-executive director of REVERB. And man, it's been great to talk to you. And I'm really excited to both be getting music live happening again, but to get the music revolution and environmental revolution to be really a part of people's lives, and so that when we think of going to concerts, we think of it as something that we can feel proud about and not something that we've got to go, gosh, I wish we were doing this better. And now with this big gap that we've all had to really rethink things, it's a time that both as fans and artists and production companies and promoters around the country and around the world, that we can really retool the way that we think about touring. And so thanks for being with us today. Folks, please go check out Reverb and Guster.com. And thanks for being here on the Stay Human podcast.
Thanks for having me, Michael. This is great.
Right on.